Hello, welcome back to Casablanca. This week, I am covering The Aviator. You're probably wondering why so many episodes so quickly. Well, that was an accident. I was meant to schedule Yellow Submarine to come out this week for this week's episode, but whenever I went to go schedule it, I accidentally scheduled it for the wrong Sunday, and it came out a week early, so I just did this instead. So, yeah. And what's funny is it turns out when I was counting the episodes to begin with, I was planning out the episodes, so I counted the weeks. I was like, okay, it's going to end on this, episode 40 is going to be Halloween, and I had it planned out. And when I realized my mistake, I was freaking out, like, oh no, I've thrown it all off. And then I realized, actually, I miscounted when I did that. And yeah, so instead of skipping an episode or moving this one, I'll just post it like normal, and then we're back on schedule. So I made a mistake, but it worked itself out. So basically, two wrongs made a right in this case. Which, they say two wrongs don't make a right. Sometimes it does. So anyway, The Aviator is a 2004 biopic directed by Martin Scorsese, written by John Logan, and starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Cate Blanchett, and Alec Baldwin, and a whole bunch of other people. I will get into that later, but yeah, it is insane, the amount of people that are in here and the characters they play. This is one of my favorite movies. It always has been. I'm surprised I haven't reviewed it before now. It's about the life of Howard Hughes, who... I was going to say, it's a real-life story. He's a real-life person. I did say it's a biopic, which by default makes it a true story, or at least inspired by a true story. And this one seems to be fairly accurate. I have, in the past, gone through and looked at what really happened, and like I said in the past on the Pursuit of Happiness episode, it's a movie, so there's liberties taken. So it's accurate as they could. I'm gonna point out later that they covered a lot in this. It doesn't cover his entire life. It only covers from 1927 to 1947, so it's 20 years. It covers 20 years. It is 2 hours 49 minutes long. And they covered 20 years. And they put a lot into this movie. A lot of stuff happens. You meet a lot of people. And so the fact that they didn't cover everything in that time period, it's still cool. I mean, it's Martin Scorsese. He's known for being one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. So, yeah, I kind of want them to make a sequel. Because... Leo, it's been 20 years. Next year will be 20 years that they've made this movie. And Leo is a bit older, obviously. And so he could play an older Howard Hughes. And they should do the rest of his life. Because I think he died 20 years after that. I think he died in the 70s. Actually, I have Wikipedia pulled up. I should have added that to my notes. He died April 5th, 1976 at the age of 70. So... yeah, Leo could totally play him. Do a sequel and do the rest of his life. I want to see this movie. But with what they've given us, they did a really good job. Because I want to cover some of the people that they included in this. For starters, there is... well, first off, my first praise for this movie goes to Cate Blanchett as Katharine Hepburn. I don't know if you've seen any Katharine Hepburn movies, but Cate Blanchett, does a perfect Katharine Hepburn. I'm surprised that they haven't used her to turn around and make a Katharine Hepburn biopic, because she gets the voice and mannerisms and everything down perfectly, and it's insane. So, like, this movie, they decided to give him an antagonist because they've got to have an antagonist in the movie, and they made it Alec Baldwin. His character is Juan Tripp, who's a real person. Obviously, everyone in here is a real person for the most part, and I love what they did with this. I think if in like pretty much any other movie, if they had done this, and they've done this in other biopics, where if they took a real person who was just like a minor inconvenience to somebody and turned them into like a comic book villain, and then like the real life person was like, no, I just said no, and then they turned me into like this villain. But like they took Juan Tripp, and he was like kind of an antagonist to Howard Hughes, but what I wrote in here is he's the antagonist, not the villain. So like there's moments in here where like it shows that like he actually cares about Howard Hughes, like when he's like talking to him outside the door, when he's going through like the mental breakdown area where he like grows his beard out, and then like Alec Baldwin stands up and he's like, the public cannot see him like this. And so like like they could have made him into like a comic book villain, like I'm going to make him pay and I will destroy you, Howard Hughes. But they don't do that, and I think like they do like a realistic take on this. However, there was one character I think they did real bad in here, and that is played by Kelly Garner. The character is Faith Demur, and this movie, like, just researching for this episode, I mean, I've seen this movie like 100 times since it came out, and researching for this episode, because I watched this movie yesterday, and I was going to record this episode yesterday, but I went down a rabbit hole. And I was like, I can't record this until I've finished this research. It got to the point where I had to just say, nope, stop the research and just record the episode, because at this point, I'm not doing an Aviator episode, I'm doing a Digressor episode. So, which I totally could have done that, but I'm just gonna stick to the Aviator. But with Faith Demur, she's barely in it, and they have it so that you meet her whenever like she walks in, and she's like, it's like she's auditioning to be his lover or something, and he's like, you'll understand, you'll be under contract for me, and she's like, yes. But in doing my research, I found out I'm sure that happened. That's not where they met. They met on a yacht at a party, and she had already been kind of known a little bit. Not like, and like, she wasn't like a known actress, but she had done a few things, and she went on to have like a full career, and she's in it for like 2-3 scenes. There was that whenever you first meet her when she's doing the audition, and then like the immediate scene after where she's like, I go to school and I get picked up, and then like, yeah, and then later whenever she like rams her car into Howard Hughes, and they make her seem like she's crazy, and I'm like, and so that's where I'm thinking, oh, they made this character up because they did everyone else so right. They're not going to do this to a real person. But no, she was a very real person, and they had her in 2 scenes and just made her seem crazy, which, looking back, I'm like, I'm not sure I like those scenes now. It's also, those scenes didn't age well because it showed Howard Hughes finding out that she's 15 and being like, oh, and then dating her anyway. And it didn't age well, not just because of that, but because Leonardo DiCaprio is known for having younger girlfriends. So, yeah. I think my favorite character in here has to be... I have so much praise for Cate Blanchett's portrayal of Katharine Hepburn, but I also like Kate Beckinsale's character of Ava Gardner, who I've heard of that character. I know that actress. I've heard her so many times. She's like a very well-known person, but it never occurred to me until I was doing my research that's who that was in that movie. As I see her as, oh, she's just a character in here, and she's like some random nobody, but no, it's Ava Gardner, because I don't think that's a common thing I've noticed in this movie, is it'll just casually introduce people, but it won't always tell you who they are. And like in the movie, it stresses that every time, like Howard Hughes is always like, will you marry me? And she's like, no, because I don't love you, Howard. Well, that's how it really was. Like, he was in love with her, but she it was never romantic for her. And they stayed close for many years until his, like, I think it said until his death. But they stayed, like, really, it was one of the few people, she was one of the few people that I fully trusted and, like, would always, like, go to and, like, open up to. And it was, like, it's like she knew the real Howard Hughes. And so, like, they portrayed that well in the movie, where, like, they're not a romantic couple, but, like, whenever, like, especially in the second half, whenever he's struggling with a whole bunch of stuff, she's always there. It's like, yes, Howard, I know, I understand. You're different. Speaking of them not always telling you who people are, like, I knew that she's Katharine Hepburn. It's very well known, but I didn't realize till this time that they don't actually say it's Katharine Hepburn until later in the movie, whenever he's trying to buy so, like, when he's trying to buy the photos off of Willem Dafoe's paparazzi character, that scene where he's like, my office knows where I am, Howard. Like, I'm not going to kill you. I don't do that. Yeah, he says he wants to buy the photos that he has off of Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. And I realized that's the first time you really hear Katharine Hepburn in the movie. I mean, he says Miss Hepburn, he says Kate, but, like, you never hear them together. And so, like, if you're not, like, really paying attention or, like, know the history, you're like, oh, who's this person? And same thing with Spencer Tracy. Like, whenever you're introduced to him, and he like throws the apple at Katharine Hepburn, and she catches it, and he's like, I've got a whole bushel of them at my farm, or whatever. Like, she doesn't like, oh, Spencer, or it's Mr. Tracy, or it's just some guy. Or if you recognize him as Kevin O'Rourke, you can be like, oh, it's Kevin O'Rourke playing a character. It's not until that scene with Willem Dafoe where you actually get the name, and unless you know the history that they had a thing. So, but I think the biggest example of that, and I didn't even know this character was in there until I was doing the research for this. I recognized Jude Law because, I mean, come on, it's Jude Law. I've known he was in there. I just thought he was some random character. In this scene, whenever they're at the restaurant with Kate, I think it's like right after they start dating, and he has like the steak and the 12 peas lined up, and then there's this guy talking. He reaches over and takes a pea and eats it and starts talking, and then Howard is all like staring at the steak. He's like, I don't want this now. I gotta leave. The guy that reaches over and takes it, that's Jude Law, because again, very obvious that that's Jude Law. I didn't realize he was playing Errol Flynn this whole time. I never knew that. So, but then I watched the scene back. I looked it up on YouTube and I watched the scene. And Howard goes, oh, you know Errol. And Kate goes, oh, Mr. Flynn. It's like, they say it. They do the thing again. They don't say, oh, it's Errol Flynn. They're like, oh, it's Errol. Oh, hey, Mr. Flynn. And I just, in my mind, I didn't put the two together. That's Errol Flynn. I mean, so they tell you in the movie, but it's not obvious. So I was talking about doing rabbit holes, going down rabbit holes. And I think the biggest one for me, the moment I had to stop and just record the episode, was Jean Harlow in the movie. She's played by Gwen Stefani. It's literally in like one scene. At the premiere of Hell's Angels, they're at the premiere, and they're walking down the red carpet, and like they're holding hands walking down, and she's like, I'd like to thank Mr. Hughes for giving me the opportunity. And that's Gwen Stefani. And then at the end of the movie, at the premiere in the movie, still the beginning of the movie, like, she stands up and is like, "Come on, Mr. Hughes, stand up, take a bow," or whatever she says. That's Jean Harlow, and I recognize the name. I think I've seen a couple of her movies. She's a classic. I used to always watch like those old silent films and the old black and white movies, But like I didn't actually like know who she was, like her story, and I found out something kind of. I'm actually just going to read this thing from the Wikipedia. So apparently she wrote a novel in the 30s, I believe, and she wanted to get it published. This is taken from her Wikipedia. Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM, prevented the book from being sold by putting an injunction on it using a clause in Harlow's contract. Her services as an artist couldn't be used without MGM's permission. Eventually, the book was published in 1965. The book was written in the 30s. It was published in 1965. You want to know why that's kind of depressing? Because the scene in the Aviator where you see her is in 1927. She died in 1937 at the age of 26. So, well, she died young. I've read in the Wikipedia article, there's a really long entry on the death section on her Wikipedia page. It's very long. There's several paragraphs. I had to scroll a lot. Apparently, she went on a trip and got the flu, and it like wouldn't go away, and then she tried to work anyway. I think they made her work. And her last film, she was working with Clark Gable. And there's a photo taken of her, Clark Gable, and the director. And it says underneath the photo taken just minutes before she collapsed. When she collapsed, she was rushed to the hospital, slipped into a coma, and died. So, and you can see in the photos, she has this very kind of like distant look on her face, like she wasn't really there. And so like, knowing that, it's just like, oh, this is kind of a haunting photo, actually. But yeah, like she died at the age of 20. She died at the age of 26, which, considering like she's a very well-known like classic Hollywood name, like I want to see all her movies now. I really liked the portrayal of OCD in this film. Leonardo DiCaprio is really good at portraying like mental illnesses and afflictions and stuff. And like in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, he played a mentally challenged kid to the point that for the longest time I didn't even realize that it was Leonardo DiCaprio. I thought they just hired a mentally challenged kid. He did that good of a job. And even today, like I see him, like he did Titanic like 3 years after What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and I can't see Arnie and Jack being the same person. And same with this, is he does OCD so well, and I can vouch for this because I have OCD. And so, like, actually what's funny is this is the movie I actually realized it. And so, like, I've told people this before, when I was like, oh, it's because of The Aviator I realized I had OCD, and they're like, you can't diagnose yourself off a movie. And I didn't. It's seeing this movie that I'm like, hey, wait, I do that. And I looked into it, and then I was officially diagnosed with OCD. So I didn't diagnose myself based on a movie. The movie is what led me to get looked at, and to that I can't spoke. But like, Howard Hughes is like a severe case. Like I'm not saying like I do the same thing that he does. It's like, hey, that looks familiar. Like, case in point, that scene after he leaves the like that theater screen thing where he like grows his beard out and he's there for a while. Well, he goes back to his house and he like ropes off the house and he's like, oh, that's the safe area. The germs are over there. Like, I've never done that specifically, but like I get it because I've done similar-ish things. Like, for example, I've had, like, when I had my own full apartment, there were like times where like I wouldn't use entire sections of the counter, the kitchen counter. It's as clean as the rest of the counter, but like I'll see like something will land over there. Like I'll set a plate down or something. I'll set like a dirty plate down. I'll pick it up and like, oh, that counter's dirty. So I don't touch that counter at all. That part of the counter. And then it gets to the point where I have just like a little corner that I can use. It looks the same as the rest of the counter, but I could tell in my mind, I can see like, oh, that whole section is dirty and just this section is clean. Even though it's probably equally dirty. In my mind, I can tell the difference between like reality and what's OCD, but like the OCD and the anxiety is louder sometimes. So, like, yeah. Eventually the OCD will take over to the point where I just clean. Like, okay, this happened about a month ago. It was the middle of the night. And I couldn't sleep. I was listening to a podcast and I was playing a game. And then I paused the podcast and the game. I got up, put on some gloves, and then spent an hour deep cleaning the bathroom. And then I took the gloves off, washed my hands, and then I just continued the podcast and the game. Just out of nowhere. I don't even know where that came from. I didn't even think about it until afterwards. I'm like playing the game for a few minutes and I'm like, wait, what just happened? did I just deep clean the bathroom? And then I did that to the kitchen once too. Like, I also have ADHD and dyslexia, and those three do not mix, especially when like the OCD and the ADHD combine, where instead of, okay, so you know that meme about, you know, the ADHD string of thought where it's like, oh, I was doing this, but then I remembered I had to do that, and then in order to do that I had to do this. That mixed with the OCD, when I'm cleaning, I'll go to like, I'm like, oh, I've got this fork I need to go clean, and I go to wash the fork. And then it's like, oh, well, there's this. And then I'll wipe the counter. Like, I'll wipe the sink, like the area around the sink because it got dirty. It got wet. And while I'm wiping that down, I end up wiping the counter down. But then when I'm wiping the counter down, I'll accidentally swipe stuff to the floor. And then I'll sweep. And like, well, I'm here. I might as well mop. And then next thing you know, the whole kitchen's clean because I wanted to clean a fork. So, yeah, The Aviator. Really good movie. But yeah, like this movie, like it is currently streaming on Paramount Plus. If you want to watch it, I highly suggest watching it it's on Paramount Plus. I was going to buy it, but I did not. This is the one I was going to buy. It was either I buy this one or the next one, which the next episode is going to be the first episode of the Halloween episodes. And the next episode that I'm going to do in this series wasn't streaming anywhere. And I found one copy online on DVD. And it was because I was about to buy The Aviator on Blu-ray. And then I only had enough for one movie. And I was literally going through checkout, and then I remembered that other movie. And was like, you know what? The Aviator's streaming. That movie is not. That's probably the only copy I'm going to find unless I pirate it, and I'm not going to pirate it. I don't pirate movies. So, I bought the next one, and I streamed this one. I'm trying to buy all the movies now instead of, I like streaming, but I also prefer owning movies. I don't own a whole lot of movies, to be honest. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to end the episode here. I have to find a better outro besides I'm ending the episode here.